Well, here we go again. It was just a few days ago that Iran struck Israel, but now Israel has struck back against Iran. And this time, tons of media focus is on the one word that no one wants to hear: nuclear. Suffice it to say that we have been cursed by living in interesting times. But what is the real threat here? To answer that, on tap for today, we will discuss what exactly Israel did with this strike, what Israel's motivation here may be, what the United States thinks of all of this, especially on the eve of a vote on an aid package to Israel, what may happen next with the situation, and we will finish with a deep dive on the nuclear dimension. And as a preview there, much of the media discussion on this topic is silly, though there is a deeper intrigue in it. But we begin with what actually happened. Here is the fast version. Israel and Iran do not like each other. Western intelligence believes that Iran supports proxies that actively fight against Israel, a problem that has become especially prominent since Hamas's October 7th attack. Israel bombed a building connected to Iran's embassy in Damascus, Syria on April 1st, killing a few members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. After a period of mourning, Iran vowed to retaliate. That came to fruition on April 13th, with drone and missile strikes on Israel. Mercifully, that takes us to April 19th. Israel fired missiles at Iran, apparently targeting an airbase near the city of Isfahan. With a population of 2.2 million, it is Iran's third largest city, and is about a 5-hour drive from the capital, Tehran. The ostensible point of the attack was to hit the home of Iran's fleet of F-14 Tomcats, a base that has some important defense implications that we will get to later. Now, if you are thinking to yourself, 1, isn't the F-14 an American fighter? And 2, isn't the F-14 retired? Then the answers are yes and yes. Welcome to the wonderful world of international arms trade, where the Shah's fleet became the Ayatollah's fleet in 1979. And even if the United States ended the F-14 service in 2006, Iran does not have the same luxury of moving on to the next shiny thing. There is also a nuclear facility nearby, but we will get to that in a minute. One interesting thing to note is that the most straightforward pathway to reach the target involves Israel's goods flying over some combination of Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwait, meaning that there may have been some very interesting conversations between the capitals before Israel fired the missiles. In any case, Iran suggests that the damage appears minimal, and indeed, Iranian state media claims that Israel's 3 drones were shot down. That is not the only intelligence assessment, but again, hold that thought. Okay, so that more or less is what happened. Now we move on to why it happened, specifically from the Israeli perspective. The basic idea here is that this is a standard sort of tit for tat, and that Israel wanted to show Iran attacking the homeland will not come without a response. In other words, this is a matter of trying to deter future attacks. As Biden pleaded to Netanyahu a few days ago, merely taking the win and ending things was not enough for him. There has been much speculation that Netanyahu's motivation in continuing the crisis is a desperate act to save his position, that he is unpopular, and that something drastic needs to happen for him to resurrect his career. So, according to the theory, he is visiting our favorite casino and gambling on a broader war with Iran. Now, that incentive certainly does exist, but if Netanyahu is trying to exploit it, he's doing a fairly poor job. It will be very easy for Iran to just shrug off Israel's response, and that is the exact opposite of what you want if your goal is to create a bigger crisis. Part of what might be happening here is that Israel is trying to balance this crisis with the war in Gaza. Israel appears to be holding out on the final step of invading Rafah because it does not want to divide its attention between the two conflicts, even if they are kind of the same. Thus, the compromise between establishing deterrence and ending things with Iran is a small response. Otherwise, you risk the war in Gaza stalling out indefinitely. This may also speak to why Israel did not opt for some sort of covert response. It would take more time to set up explosions of unknown origins, and thus does not have the same signaling value as a direct missile strike. Meanwhile, the United States does not appear as frustrated this time around as compared to the Damascus strike. Rewinding to that earlier attack, Washington was frustrated because it received no forewarning about what Israel planned to do until the planes were in the air. Why is that a problem? Well, the United States has a ton of assets in that region, and in the immediate aftermath of an attack, they become obvious targets. That means you want your bases on high alert in the hours after a strike. You can see the problem here. It is harder to go on high alert when you do not know that you need to do so until it is time to do so. This time, Israel provided some improved level of forewarning, which is probably a wise courtesy to extend when you are on the eve of a House vote on $26.4 billion in aid. Still, courtesy or not, the Biden administration appeared to not be thrilled with the response, and the primary reasons are threefold. First, this is just generally increasing instability in the world, which is not in the United States' best interest. Second, it is an election year, and Biden has some strange electoral incentives. Welcome to Michigan, a swing state from the last two election cycles, going with Trump in 2016 and with Biden in 2020. Oh, and for the sake of my foreign audience, Michigan is this one. Once upon a time, it was politically best known for its auto worker unions. But it also just so happens to have the greatest density of Arab Americans, coming in at 2.11% of Michiganders. And yes, Michigander is the prevailing demonym. Anyway, taking a gander at the bigger picture, that 2.11% is almost double the 1.2% of New Jerseyans who are Arab American. And Trump only won Michigan by 0.2% in 2016. Biden does not like being put in a tight spot where he needs to balance support to Israel with also not losing votes in a state that could put him over the top in the Electoral College. Finally, again, because it is an election year, everyone cares about pain at the pump. Sanctions or not, Iran is still an oil exporter, so continued conflict risks spiking oil prices. Indeed, Brent oil jumped from about $87 a barrel to a shade above $90 within hours of the news breaking. It has since fallen back to below $87, likely in response to our next subject. And that takes us to what is likely to happen next with the situation. Prior to the strikes, Iran said that it would immediately respond to any retaliation that Israel might pursue. But rather than follow through on that threat, Iran has pivoted to saying that Israel's attack was irrelevant. Indeed, Iran has not returned with rocket strikes, nor were there any Shahed drones incoming. All three of Israel's alleged missiles were shot down, and so there was no need for a response. And Israel seems to believe this rhetoric. It was business as usual within the country the morning after the strikes. This is in stark contrast to what happened on the eve of Iran's last attack, when Israel had effectively implemented a preemptive shutdown of the country, and later sirens started blaring. The logic for Iran is that another strike on Israel risks Israel striking back again, and this time more seriously. It is basically the classic concern of an escalation spiral. That may also be why Iran originally announced that its attack was happening, and then announced that it had ended, all before the drones reached their targets. Now, obviously, a real response could still happen, and it would pose an interesting question to the United States about how much to do in defense during such a second round, despite Israel ignoring Washington's recommendation, and the prior declaration that the United States would not participate in a response. Furthermore, there are more extreme measures that Iran could take, primarily shutting down the Strait of Hormuz. But that is a nightmare scenario that we ought to save for another time. The more plausible route that Iran takes is to simply ramp up the support to proxy groups in the area. It still damages Israel as perhaps desired. However, it does not have an obvious connection to the ongoing flare-up, which means it exits us from the spiral. But that, unfortunately, is predicated on Iran wanting to exit the spiral. The great irony of this, of course, is that we arrived at our current story arc because Israel struck Iran in Syria in response to Iran's proxy support. But hey, I guess that is just life. Finally, we arrive at the nuclear dimension. Time to buckle up. This received a lot of media focus because the word is big and scary. But what is actually going on here? To answer that, we go back to the map. Israel's strike appears to have aimed at a base here. I need to note that this location is unconfirmed at the time of writing, but it is the best that I have to go on. There are 2 nuclear facilities in the broader region. We have the Isfahan facility here, and then all the way up here, we have the Natanz facility. Neither facility was targeted with the attack, and so it is worth spending some time explaining why I do not think that there was any intention to do so, at least at this time. But to do that, we first need to go on a bit of a science tangent. Western intelligence organizations believe that Iran is interested in building nuclear weapons, using uranium as the fuel. Broadly speaking, to build such a bomb, you need to pull uranium out of the ground, mill and process it until you get a delicious substance known as yellowcake, and convert the solid yellowcake into uranium hexafluoride gas. Then you need to take that gas and spin it around in uranium centrifuges at ridiculously high speeds. You see, 99.3% of naturally occurring uranium is the 238 isotope, but most of the remaining 0.7% is the 235 isotope that actually creates explosive chain reactions. Iran has been spinning uranium gas in its centrifuges to exploit the weight difference of the 3 extra neutrons between 238 and 235. This eventually concentrates the 235 isotope, and then you assemble a bomb, and voila, boom. Now, the facility in Isfahan converts yellowcake into uranium hexafluoride. Meanwhile, the facility in Natanz has those uranium-enriching centrifuges. Unfortunately, the public intel on Iran's progress is bad. But that caveat aside, the consensus is that Iran has enough uranium gas to build a bomb, or perhaps more than one bomb. The scientists just need to spend a little more time on this step, spinning the gas around in the centrifuges, so that it hits the desired 90% or so concentration of 235. Back to the map again. Remember that Natanz, site of the centrifuges, is way up here, roughly 300 kilometers away from the target. So it is a little weird to connect it to the Israeli strikes that occurred way down here, at least directly. And again, hold that thought for just a second, we're almost there. Basically, what I am saying is that there is no way that Israel missed its target by that much. Insofar as the strikes connect to the Isfahan facility, well, that would be like your opponent bombing the mold of your tanks after you have already produced a fleet's worth of frames. It is useful for preventing more tanks from being constructed, but if your opponent's real concern is stopping any tanks from being completed, well, then it had better point its bombs further north. And even then, Iran may have made enough progress already that this would only encourage Iran to punch the program across the finish line, even if some of its facilities take damage in the process. That does not mean that Israel would never strike nuclear facilities, should this situation spiral further out of control. They are still very expensive to construct. So if you want to punish Iran really bad, they do make pretty solid targets. It is just that this is not how you would do it right now. Nuclear headlines may attract more eyeballs, but it is a stretch to bring them into the conversation. At least not yet. You see, despite the distance, one of the roles that the targeted airbase plays is defense of the Natanz facility. And that previously alluded to American report is that Israel's attack actually succeeded here, in contrast to Iran's claims. By the way, they can't even agree on whether they were drones or missiles. Take that for what you will. We really need to start summing things up here. Israel has paid a price to alter the balance of power in its favor. This is a classic type of signaling behavior that can credibly clarify a state's intentions. After all, the costs deter unresolved types from bluffing. But the last time we saw something like this, it ended very differently. There is a much longer version of this argument that works with lines on maps, but we will have to save it for another time. The point is that if we go through another round of this, we may very well be talking about nuclear targets then. It is just that in this moment, we are not quite there. For now, if you want to learn more about the broader conflict in the Middle East, I have a playlist dedicated to the subject. Check it out. And if you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.